So can you homestead forever? I think that's a huge question, and I'm going to put this from my own experience, having been, I think it's like 14 or 15 years doing this, with many different incarnations and changes along the way. But the short answer is I think you can. You can homestead for years, but you may not be able to do everything for that entire lifespan. You physically may not be able to do it all for your whole life. And I think this is a really big thing to talk about because this is our ideology, my ideology, and I've looked at it this way right from the get-go, that a lot of the smaller things, and I'm going to say particularly animals, are easier to do longer because they're smaller. Which sounds ridiculous, but it's somewhat true. It's far easier to handle chickens. It's far easier to handle rabbits. When you have to wrestle with sheep or cattle, you can sort of intrinsically see where you might not be doing that your whole life. Unless you are planning of sort of a succession where somebody's going to take that over from you. Now, when you look at a lot of farmers, and I would say I'm not a farmer by proper definition, we kind of do the opposite. We could build things to make it into a business, but we kind of get to that certain point and go, the amount that we would have to invest versus the overhead we have, it's not happening for us, which is why we always do the growing stuff to try to save money. But if you look at a lot of successful farms, many of them are second, third, or fourth generation, and you can see the build, right? If it's a big dairy farm, that's a very hard thing to just start from scratch in today's day and age without having a lot of capital that you can just throw at it. And then you probably could get the bank loans to do it. So anybody who's pretty successful at it, there's been family build on that. And I think for homesteaders, that's something that we don't always think about, is that succession. Because those big animals in particular, if you're really getting into breeding cattle, that sort of thing, for example, you eventually are going to get to the point where you're going to have to decide, can I keep going with this, or is there anybody else to keep going with it? And I think that's something, depending on where you are in your journey, it's far easier. And I think that's why things like rabbits and chickens are really good entry animals into the homesteading world, because you can get into it, get some, and in a very short period of time, you can really start to see the benefit. And you can keep that going for a very long time. When you start getting into bigger animals, that's a lot harder to do unless you do more of the put and take type scenario. So it's just something to think about, because when you're 80, and I know there are lots of 80-year-olds who are still farming cattle, but when you're 80, do you really want to be doing that? Are you going to be physically capable of doing that? It's a question you probably should be asking yourself, depending on where you are in your time frame. And it's not necessarily just animals, because even the garden stuff can be that way. Certain things like apple trees and berry bushes and stuff, once you get established, and you have to have that forward thinking to, long term, but once they're established, they may not be a lot of work to keep it going. You can kind of go reap the benefits. But some of the other things, some of the annual crops and whatnot, when you really start looking at how much you actually need, and this is like the catch-22. I think this is the part that torments me, but I think us as well the most, is how much food and how many resources it takes to keep a human alive for a year. To do all of that on your own, especially as you get older, that's almost impossible. We've never hit it. We've been doing it forever, and we've never hit that number. We're always basically being subsidized by things that come from off farm. And I think that's huge, because you still want to be, this is my opinion, you still want to be, it's an editorial piece, you still want to be having that mindset of trying to produce as much as you can for yourself, but you have to know what your limits of resources are. I think that's kind of the crux of this discussion, is just thinking about how much you really can do and how long you're going to be able to do it, because depending on where you are in your life, it may be better to invest more effort into some of those smaller things that can get you a quicker return. I'm going to say with less effort, less physical labor. It's just some food for thought, or thought for food.